So l'chaim, everybody.
Thank you, Rav. Thank you.
And certainly with pleasure. And we're having in mind Jonathan Silberman. What is his name?
What kind of op is it? What kind of ops? So what type of op did he have?
His name is Jonathan Israel.
Yeah.
Pension Zai.
You need the mother's name. Did he give you his? Did Benji give you his name? Jeanette. What's Jeanette's name? Probably, but you know what we'll do? Yeah. Well,
You're right.
yeah, we can say Jeanette in the meantime. Jonathan Yisrael Ben Jeanette. Yeah, that will work. I'm just finding my list, my refuah shleima list. I'll put it on over there as well.
There's no cure for epilepsy.
No,
But there's is it
research and medication, but a couple of years ago, I had a massive operation that was supposed to.
So this Benji is Yossi, sure. He's got divorced this week.
Yeah, he told me what's coming there. Yeah.
And he's
Effie.
and he got
So not Malurkin is.
Harry Mills.
And Harry Mills. So l'chaim, everybody should be gesund. I know I have also in my community a lady that's literally fighting for her life. So a wonderful person struggling with blood clots that are shooting in the wrong places and
Do you know where it's from?
after treatments. Huh?
Where it's from?
Blood clots.
The vaccine.
Now, I didn't say anything. We're being recorded here, Melbourne, so let's discuss the vaccine. We'll get booted off in here. Yeah.
So
Let's not jump to conclusions, but rather to say
I heard the
refuah shleima to everybody. Her name is Devorah Leah Bat Avraham. In this case, it's Avraham because she converted, so it remains Bat Avraham.
I'm sorry.
But Avraham.
So many other people have had
Yeah.
from the vaccine.
That's how it works.
I was one of them.
And please God, she should have a refuah shleima. So a wonderful person, integral part of our community. Yeah.
Dennis.
Oh, Dennis.
What's happened with Dennis?
Dennis?
So Yechiel Ben Miriam.
Yechiel Ben Miriam. Your first shleima to Yechiel Ben Miriam. So anyways, we are just get this annotating thing over here. Sorry, last week was a little bit bumpy because I had left my computer behind.
You wanted
But hopefully this week will be a bit better.
it should be around.
Yeah, 38A.
No, we should.
I'm going to go from there. Shall we? Has everybody got the place? Lamed Chet Amud Aleph. We're just going to backtrack a few lines. We'll go from Omar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. It's here.
Yeah.
We'll go from there. You got it. Has everybody got a page? 38A. I can look in. Can you see Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel?
Yeah.
So we are going to backtrack a few lines, but these are the fundamentals of the rules of Bishul Akum, which means food cooked by a Gentile, which our sages, Chazal, placed the Gezerah upon them. And we know that the process of cooking is not necessarily one process. There's different parts of cooking. There's lighting the fire, there's putting the food on the fire, there's turning the food on the fire. And at what point, so different issues that are dealt with in this Gemora. First of all, which part of the cooking process is the issue? Which part of the cooking, what is considered cooking? I mean, we had, I think it was higher up. Remember, we said that if a Gentile put that was just the one before, that if a Gentile put a wooden instrument like a peg into a furnace or an oven in order to harden it, that's not really cooking. That's really fixing. or some type of woodcraft where you're trying to harden a peg. But if the intention wasn't to cook, but the intention was to harden the vessel, that was the part just before, then if by default he ended up helping you cook some food, that wouldn't be a problem because his intention wasn't to cook. And then there was also a contrast. We contrasted it with the laws of Shabbos. Remember, we spoke about it, where we know that bishul, cooking, is one of the melachot, one of the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. But sometimes something that's defined as cooking in one place is not necessarily the same definition of cooking in another. For instance, one of the commentaries explains or defines that in that case we spoke about before, when you would put like a wooden instrument or a peg in the furnace or the oven. So there's two stages, apparently. This is coming actually from Shabbos, from the Gemora in Shabbos. There's two stages in this process where a person would take a piece of wood, like a peg, and try to harden it in order that it becomes a keli, a wooden vessel. One is that when they first heat it up, it starts to schwitz, it loses its moisture. The moisture that's in the wood, the natural moisture in the wood comes out, and it loses its moisture. And the first reaction that it has is that the piece of wood actually becomes softer. And then in the manufacturing process, what happens is the moisture that comes out starts to dry and evaporates, and then the piece of wood becomes harder. So first it gets soft, and then it gets hard in a two-phase process. And in the tractate of Shabbos, over there, the Gemora said that the first process, which is when it gets softer, is considered to be cooking. But the second process, where it gets harder, is not considered cooking. So even though the thing that the person's cooking is not food, it's a peg or an instrument, over there, the conclusion of the Gemora was that in a, let's say, a factory process, if you were manufacturing pegs, various factories have furnaces or kilns or do things, processes using heat. So the general idea there was that round one, where the moisture comes out and the wood gets softer, is called cooking. And round two, where it evaporates in the heat and gets harder, is not considered cooking.
Where's the grey line?
So the one
Sorry?
transforming,
Where's the grey line?
you're not.
Where's the grey line? So that was when it came to Shabbos.
Yeah.
When it came to the laws of Shabbos, we said that round one was called cooking, even though it's not food. And round two was not called cooking. Round two was called, whatever you want to call it, manufacturing. But that's not an act of cooking. So
on Shabbat, the problem is that the makel is not big. That's
Yeah.
what.
but the Isur, the prohibition, there are other malachas, that's right, there are 39, so there's only, but one of them, the one they were focusing on there, was called bishul, of cooking. And in Shabbos we said that the first process where the wood gets softer is considered cooking, even though the thing that the person's sticking in an oven is not necessarily food. It isn't food. However, when it came to bishul akum, when it came to the gezerah, the decree that the rabbis made, that we should not eat food that's cooked by a Gentile, there the sages said differently, that the moment a person heats or creates fire in order to do something that's not food related, it doesn't matter if it's the first part of the process, it doesn't matter if the second, that's not called cooking. So therefore, if the non-Jew was busy stoking the furnace to put his pegs in, and the Jew had some food in there at the same time, that would not be called bishul akum, food cooked by a goy. Because one of the provisos, one of the rules we said, is that for food to be called cooked by a goy, he must intend to cook food, not intend to harden pegs or do anything else in the oven, not running a clay factory, and he's putting mugs and dishes and who knows what. It's about food. And then the Gemora came. Making it edible. Yeah, that's right.
Great.
So the criteria was that it had to be a situation where he intends to cook and he does cook. And that's why even if he didn't intend to cook your food, he intended to cook other food, it's still a problem. In other words, the Jew put food in the oven, the non-Jew put other food in the oven. Let's say it was neutral food, because if you put tray food, that for sure would be a problem. But the Jew put food in the oven, the non-Jew put food in the oven, the non-Jew made the fire or turned it on or whatever it was in order to cook his food, and the Jew's food cooked along together with it. that's a problem of Bishul Goyim or Bishul Akum, because his intention was to cook food. He may not have intended to cook your food, but he intended to cook food. By the way, in the days of old, there was a lot of shared ovens. Not everybody had a privilege of a fully equipped kitchen.
Sure.
A lot of shared ovens. People cooked together. They had like in a town square big ovens, and people would bring their stuff to the oven.
Jewish.
Sorry? It could be sometimes they had to, so they would have to figure out how to do it in a way that's halachically correct.
Sure.
So Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, you'll be familiar with these lines. The first of the lines we did read. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashmuel, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Hiniach Yisrael Bacher al Gabe Gecholim. Let's say the Jew put meat on the coals. I did exactly that on Friday because there was load shedding. The only way to cook was the coals. So, Hiniach Yisrael Bacher Gabe Gecholim, the Yid put the food on the coals. Uba Ovid Kechavim, and the non-Jew came v'hafach by, and he turned. You know what I mean? He came with the tongues and he turned the meat. He bride it. So what do we say?
As long as the Jew.
We said it's permissible. We said, and this is the beginning of the discussion. We'll find out why.
We said it's a party. They have to first put the meat on.
They demand that it's actually put on. Yeah.
Put on,
But here we're talking about
No,
that would still be good. That would still be good, by the way. Yeah, he put both. He made the fire and he put the meat. All the non-Jew did here, or maybe I shouldn't say all, because it could have been even more important, is he did the actual movements. He turned it. He looked where the hot coals were and he was moving the meat around. V'hafach boy, he turned it. Mutter, it's permissible.
Maybe he hafach b'gechalim.
Maybe
he turned
the coals.
The coals, not the meat.
The translation here says he turned the meat over. Hafach bo. You're right, you could read it differently. But according to this Korean translation, he turned the meat, not the coals. Yeah, it's talking about the meat.
Well, the problem on Shabbos that you're not allowed because you might...
you might play with the coals, Mutter, it's permissible. So in other words, because the Jew put the meat on the coals, so it's permissible. In fact, even if the Jew didn't make the fire, it doesn't say here for sure that the Jew made the fire. He put the meat on top of the coals. He put it down there on top of the coals. The non-Jew turned
has to be involved in the process.
Exactly. And it will be defined more clearly later what it means it's involved in the process. The Gemora asks, what is going on over here? Are you talking about a situation? The Gemora unpacks it. The good news is the Gemara actually summarizes itself at the end. Are you saying if the Eloi hafach by hava bashil, that even without the non-Jew turning the meat, it would have cooked anyway? So what's the big deal that the non-Jew came and turned it over a few times? It would have cooked anyway. Pshita, should be obvious that it's okay. Why do we need a brisa to tell us that it's okay? But therefore it must be the Eloi hafach, loy hava bashil, that if the non-Jew hadn't gotten involved and turned the meat around, it wouldn't have cooked at all, so to speak. Then amai mutter. Why is it allowed? Why is it permissible? Isn't this exactly something cooked by a non-Jew? Although you, the Jew, put it on the coals, without his turning and cooking, active cooking, your passive cooking wouldn't have cooked it. So if that's the case, it shouldn't be kosher. It should be bishul akum. So the Gemara wants to unpack which one are we talking about. So the Gemara answers, Lo tzricha. We're talking about a situation that Eloi hafach hava bashil, that even without the assistance of the non-Jew, it still would have cooked. But it would have cooked b'tayt show. A bit slower. He turned the volume, what do you call it? The heat up. Have a bashil b'tayt show. It would have taken 2 hours to cook. But Hashda, now that he came along with his efforts, he was able to cook it in 1 hour. So that is the case over here. We're talking about a situation that the Jew put it on the coals. And the Jew could have left it on the coals. You know, I don't know how many people are familiar with, I like Weber cooking. You know, when you cook with a Weber braai. Now, you've got your coals on either side of the Weber, and you put your meat in the middle. And then you put the indirect system. and you put the cover on the indirect system, it cooks slower. Your juices and whatever stay nicely packed. See, it's a Weber shear, not just about also about cooking. The juices and all the goodies. So it's a great way to cook. The only thing is it's going to be slower because the meat's not on top of the coals. So first of all, you have to have a lid because you're not going to get direct heat from the coals going up at the meat from the bottom. And so you've got to have that circulation. It's got to be like an oven, like a grill. Yeah. And secondly, it's going to be a bit slower. But in a way, it's better because you get certain kinds of meats do better slow. I mean, you take things like chicken or roasts. You don't want to scorch them. All you're going to do, if you put it on coals that are too hot, is you're going to singe the outside and the inside is raw. That's the big problem you find with people who don't know how to braai. What do you have? You've got burnt meat on the outside and raw meat on the inside. So you have that. On the other hand, sometimes if you push the meat over the coals, it's going to cook quicker. Even with a Weber, if you put your chicken directly over the coals, it still can cook with the lid on and whatever. It won't burn if you don't leave it too long, but it's a faster process. So you've got a faster process and a slower process, which all have their pros and cons. So what he's saying over here is what the guy did is he sped up the process. If he didn't turn the meat and do what he was going to do, it would have taken 2 hours to cook. But because he got involved, it only took 1 hour. Now it cooked in 1 hour. So, mahu the taima, what is the chiddush? In other words, when the sages make a statement, we want to know what's the novelty over here? What are they teaching us? Mahu the taima, I would have assumed karuba b'shula milsahi, that speeding up a cooking process is significant. So much so that it's as if that fellow cooked. And then it would be a problem. Kamash Malon, so what Ravina taught us is the opposite. Not so. In other words, I would have thought that speeding up the process of cooking by that non-Jew is so significant that we move the credit of cooking to him. He gets all the credit for cooking. And because of that, it's like Bishul Akum. It's like a non-Jew has cooked. And it's no good. So... Well, thank you for all your efforts, Aubrey.
Thank you.
I see Aubrey's been cooking. No problem. So what we learn? We learn the opposite. We learn that it's not so. That the fact that it would have cooked anyway is what's important. The fact that he sped up the cooking is not the issue. Okay, so that was the way the Gemora explains that case. The Jew put it on the coals, the non-Jew turned it. It's still good because all the non-Jew did was he assisted the cooking process, he sped it up. But he's not the primary cook. Then the Gemora asked a question and it quoted. Do you remember that story of Machal ben Droisai? For those who weren't here, let me just define that again. There was a certain robber called Ben Droisai, and he was, how would you call it? He earned... I'm not sure what his merit was, but he earned a very famous concept that the rabbis labeled the first level of edible food based on him because he was involved in his robbery. He had to be on the run all the time, so he didn't have a lot of time to cook. He had to flee very quickly from one place to another. So the way he solved the situation is he never cooked for too long. Because if he cooked too long, the police might have gotten there. Seems they had good police wherever he was living. And so in order not to get caught, he spent less time cooking supper. And he would cook food. There's different opinions of how much, but it was generally a third cooked. And they called that Machal ben Droisai, food like the bandit ben Droisai. In many places in Halacha, in Torah, they talk about this level of cooked food, that it's edible, that like ben Droisai's food. Underdone. But some people like it like that. Some people like the... Sorry? Yeah. Chicken's actually not such fun par cooked. Most people want their chicken done. But beef can be very nice if it's par cooked. Some people love it when it's rare and pink or whatever in the middle. So the Gemora asks a question. It contrasts what we just said before. Just now you said that the Jew started the process, the non-Jew hastened that it's okay. Now we see what seems to be different. Rabbi Asi said, quoting Rabbi Yechon, any food that is cooked to the level that Ben Reisai would eat it, partially edible, labeled Ben Reisai would eat it, there's no longer a problem of Bishul Akum. If it was not cooked to the level of partially edible food, like Ben Reisai would cook, then yesh boy mishum b'shelo eved kechavim. In other words, if a person cooked food and they came to the rabbi and they said, hold on a second, the Jew started cooking, but then a non-Jew took over, so to speak, the cooking process. Yeah. So is it considered bishul akum or not? The criteria was, how cooked was it when the non-Jew took over, basically? If it had passed the level of Ben Reisai. So in other words, if it was already at his level par-cooked, then we don't mind that a non-Jew cooked it for the rest of the time. But if it had not yet passed that level, then it's as if the non-Jew cooked it. So that is the statement. And what the Gemora wants to understand, isn't this statement at odds with what we just said? We just said a moment ago that a Jew puts it on the coals and a non-Jew comes along and speeds it up. It's okay. And now you're saying it's not okay unless it got to this level of Ben Reisai. So the Gemora answered that there were two different scenarios. One is a scenario which is continuous. Hasam could go into Oisavei Basilta. In their case, it was as though he put it in a basket. We're talking about a case where the Jew put the food or the meat in a basket, meaning it wasn't in the oven anymore. And the non-Jew took it and put it in the oven. In fact, in the text, this is exactly where we got up to. We had read up to here. Yeah. It was a bit confusing because I had the other computers and texts and whatever. But that's the non-Jew came and put it in the oven. Silta is translated here as a basket, but there's different views in the commentaries on the Gemora as to exactly what silta is. According to one view, it just means a regular basket, because if you're not cooking, you keep your food and other utensils next to the braai, next to the stove, and it just means we call it a basin, a container, anything you keep either raw food or partially cooked food in while it's waiting for you to stick it on the fire and cook it. But then there's other opinions that it actually means an implement that's used in the cooking process. That some of the ovens would have like either a tray or a long piece of wood or log. And what they would do, because the oven was so hot, is they put the food on one side. And then when they were ready to cook, they could then push it in. Or you could have a shovel. There's different interpretations of what exactly silta means. Whether it was an actual separate container from the oven or part of the oven's implements. You know, we were learning Truma last week and this week's Tetzaveh. So you see, together with the Shulchan and the Beit HaMikdash, the table and the Mizbeach and the altar, you've got all the implements, all the different kalim, the vessels that they would use together with the altar, together with the table. There was shovels and basins and scoops and ladles that are all spoken of in the parsha. So according to one view, it's part of the implements of the oven. But either way, what they're saying is that in the second case, we were talking about, in short, an interrupted cooking process. It wasn't continuous. We're not talking about the case we spoke about before to differentiate. A Jew had put it on the coals. It was already there cooking. It was already partially hot. And the non-Jew came and took over a cooking process that was in process. And therefore, that's different, because even if it was hardly cooked, the action of the Jew would have caused it to cook over 2 hours. And the non-Jew sped it up. So we're not interested in how cooked it was when the non-Jew arrived. We don't care if it was a 2-hour process of cooking and it was only 10 minutes later that the non-Jew arrived. But in the second case, we're talking about food that was completely taken off. It had been partially cooked, and now the non-Jew comes and cooks it. And then we need to know that it was cooked to the level of Ben Reisai to be okay. Hossam there, again, it says, though the Oisva Basilta, that the Jew who cooked this food had placed it in either a basket or some kind of ancillary cooking utensil. The non-Jew came and took it, and put it in the oven. How do we know it's not Bishul Akum if it was cooked a third already? And then the Gemara says that this all makes sense because we learned a brisa that seems to say exactly this. Tanya Nami Hachi, this is also taught in a brisa. The Gemara wants to say that your conclusion appears to be correct because there is a brisa that seems to say the same thing. What does it say? Maniach Yisrael Bacher al Gabei Gecholem. A Jew can put meat on coals. And the non-Jew can come along and turn it. Until the Jew comes home from shul or from the house of study. He can tell the non-Jew, I've put the meat on the coals, and could you please finish off, turn it, move it, check it. And he doesn't have to worry that it's a problem that the non-Jew is now cooking it. Likewise, a similar thing, a woman can put her pots on top of the stove, and a non-Jew can come along, and stir it, till she comes back from the bathhouse, or from the shul, she doesn't have to worry. So basically, the Gemara is saying we have a brisa that says that clearly that a Jew could start the cooking process and appoint a non-Jew to continue. This is where they derive the halacha that you can switch on the stove and your staff can cook you supper because you can walk out the house and they carry on cooking. How long were you part of the cooking process? 10 seconds. Sorry? He actually talks about the finishing of the process. So the Bnei Yeshiva, the sages asked the question, you're talking a lot over here about a Jew who put down the food and the non-Jew turned it and did the rest of it. What if it was the other way around? What if the non-Jew put down the food on the fire and the Jew was the one who turned it around and bried it?
It depends who started the fire.
They asked a question.
Who made the fire?
Who made the fire? That's the question.
No, the fire means fire.
No, somebody has to
still
put
be
on
okay.
the fire.
That's not the only part.
No, somebody has. But the Jew has to put the fire on, not the goy.
Yeah, nowadays we're strict about that.
No, in those days they weren't so strict about it.
Because if the Jew did other parts of the cooking process, it could have been okay as well. Yeah.
You have to put it on.
Yeah, but if you're in the game reserve and they're preparing brass.
So what you can come along and do is you can stoke it. You can stoke it. Basically, let's say if you ask them to make a fire for you, you can stoke it and you move the coals around a bit. However, even if you don't stoke it, if I'm not mistaken, it still would be okay because if you're the one who actually brides, you're doing the cooking. It's just that in today's day and age, we keep things simple, and the standard is that we don't let the non-Jews turn the fire on. That's the standard. It keeps it simple. We don't say sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. That can cause trouble. So the question is, what if the non-Jew put the food down on the coals, and the Jew turned it? Mahu, what is the din? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Kol v'chomer. It is a kol v'chomer. What's the kol v'chomer? Kol v'chomer means something that you can learn from another place by the strength of what happened in another situation. We said, Gemora b'yad oved kechavim mutzar. We said in other places it's good enough if a non-Jew completes the cooking process. Gemora b'yad Yisrael kol shekain. If it's completed by a Jew, how much more so? If it says in another place that if the non-Jew finishes the cooking process, it's okay, even though all the Jew did was turn on the fire, whatever, we said it's okay. The fact that the Jew completed the cooking process, all the more so, that he was the one who was involved in the food, that's taking it to its last stage, to its completion of cooking. The Gemora says, let's just catch a few more lines and then we can chat about it. Itmar Nami, along the same lines we also learned. Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amrullah, and some people quote it differently. They say it was Omar Rav Acha bar Chana Om Rabbi Yochanan, that it was Rav Acha bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. That's just the accuracy of where the quotation comes from, but not the actual quotation. Whether it was the guy who put down the food and the Jew turned it, whether it was the Jew put it down and the non-Jew turned it, mutter, it is permissible. And it is not prohibited until the beginning and the end are both done by the non-Jew. That's when it would be prohibited. When we say bishul akum, that it cannot be cooked by a non-Jew, we mean the entire process. If the non-Jew does the beginning and the non-Jew does the end, that entire process, then it's a problem.
In the middle?
But
no, he does.
so I don't think there's
problem.
I don't think that. I think it's just divided into two.
If the Jew's got anything to do with it, then it's
In other words, if there's no participation of the Jew didn't put it on and he didn't cook it, that's when you have a
But
problem.
he ate.
Yeah,
That's the final.
the eating doesn't have to do with the cooking. You know what? Maybe this is a new piece. Yeah, we can chat now. I think we'll start from here the next time.
Okay.
You see, Rabbi Chazdan,
Yeah.
The pics.
Yeah, I
You
saw
see
the
the
pic.
picture?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Mm.